On November 3rd, the group had begun to gather for the anti-Klan demonstration. And there were sort of several clusters of people sort of hanging around in the area of the community center there. And it was a very weird thing. Several people mentioned there's no cops. Sandy mentioned that, I remember. Because every demonstration we have, I mean, it's like we have our own personal police force. These cops are on our case all the time. So it was highly unusual not to have police just crawling all over the place.
Shortly after 11, from down at Willow Road, a Klan caravan, pulled on the street.
Death to the Klan! Death to the Klan! Death to the Klan!
And this fella in the front car looked very familiar. I'd seen him at the police station. It's pretty weird. I later came to know this was Dawson, a Klansman who had been given our permit by the Greensboro police without us being notified.
A man with a long barrel pistol. He leaned out of the window of the vehicle in front, and he fired it at about a 45-degree angle in the air. When I turned around, all of these people, as if a single signal had been given, lunged out of their cars in the vehicle. Like there were people laying every place. Caesar was, really charged and took a lot of bullets. There was a huge puddle of blood around Mike. Mike had been hit flush in the face. The shotgun. It was the most gruesome of all.
The very first person I got to was Sandy Smith. Blood was pouring from a hole in her head, and her eyes were open, and she'd been shot between the eyes.
Jim was laying face down, and I tried to talk to him. Then I saw the bullet hole in his back. So I got up and ran back out here, and still there weren't any policemen here.
The Klan and the state got together and planned this. That's why there were no cops here. Do you hear me? The state protects the Klan, and this makes it clear. They came through and they opened fire. They opened fire on us.
Umbrella. She's up. Whole nother level of shit you can't even understand.
What is good, my people? We are live back again with another episode of The Forecast. Down in Charlotte, North Carolina, a 24-year-old brother by the name of Jonathan Ferrell was shot 10 times by the police. So let's go back and see what this brother did that made the police fear for their life so much to shoot him 10 times.
Shots fired. Near the entrance of the Bradfield Farms community in eastern Mecklenburg County, Reedy Creek Road is wide and gently curving. It also lacks lights. And on the morning of September 14, 2013, that proved treacherous to a Charlotte man who had dropped off a friend after a night of work and socializing. Sometime around 2:30, John Ferrell's car left the pavement and went hurtling into these trees. He freed himself, losing his cell phone, and then started walking this direction on Reedy Creek Road. John Ferrell walked more than a quarter of a mile southeast back into Bradfield Farms. He stopped at the first house that he came to along the street. Inside, a young mother and her infant child were sleeping. She was jostled awake by banging at her front door. When she opened it, she saw a stranger, Jonathan Ferrell. She slammed the door shut and called 911.
911, hello?
I need help.
Where are you at?
There's a guy breaking in my front door.
There's a guy breaking in your front door? Do you know this person?
Yes, he's a black man. I opened the door and thought it was my husband.
You said he's a black male?
Yeah. Oh my God.
I know. Is he still in the house? Did he leave yet?
No, he's not in the house. He's in the front yard yelling. Oh my God, please.
Wes Kerrick was the first Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer to arrive. He approached the home but stopped after he heard yelling behind him. By that time, another police officer had driven up, and together he and Kerrick in their squad cars headed in the direction of the noise.
She knows the suspect. That's going to be negative. She does not know the subject. She thinks he was wearing either khakis or jeans, green shirt. She thinks he might have left the yard because the motion light went off.
Here on what residents know as the Pool Road, the events of September 14th quickly came to a climax. John Ferrell and two Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers met in this general area. Within seconds, Ferrell lay dead in this ditch.
16 shots fired. Suspect down.
See about shots fired?
Careful.
All units hold your traffic.
Emergency seismic. Well, suspect was hit. Suspect is down at this time.
Ferrell's autopsy showed he'd been struck by 10 bullets, most of them fired from close range. Later that day, Wes Kerrick became the first Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer in at least 30 years to be charged with an on-duty shooting. Now, Kerrick goes on trial for voluntary manslaughter. If convicted by a jury, he faces up to 11 years in prison.
So this brother, Jonathan Ferrell, was on his way home after going out with some of his friends after work, and he had just dropped one of his friends off. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, he loses control of his car and crashes on the side of the road. And apparently it's so bad that he has to crawl out the back windshield of his car. But he makes it out of the car, bleeding, and he probably has a concussion. But he walks down the street looking for help. He stopped at the first house that he saw, thinking that he's in a nice neighborhood with a bunch of nice people that would surely help him in his time of need. He ended up knocking on Sarah McCarthey's door. And when she saw a big black man standing there, she slammed the door as fast as she could and ran to go call the police.
Witnesses cried, recalling the last moments they saw Jonathan Ferrell before Officer Wes Kerrick shot him.
I was terrified. Worried about my child.
Sarah McCarthey listened to the 911 call she made while she says Ferrell banged on her door just before 3 in the morning in September 2013.
Bang that table if you would, for sure.
McCarthey says she feared Ferrell was trying to break in. Several co-workers testified he'd just met them for a drink and later smoked marijuana. Prosecutors argue Ferrell then wrecked his car and needed help.
Did you ever ask this person what they wanted?
The defense says Ferrell never mentioned he'd wrecked.
Do you ever hear somebody say, come back, I need help?
No.
Ferrell's mother shook her head as prosecutors showed a picture of his body for the first time, face down, handcuffed, after Officer Kerrick shot the unarmed man 10 times, a photo the defense argues should not have been shown.
There's no true purpose in this case other than to show him laying down in a ditch for the jury to invoke sympathy.
The first firefighter on the scene testified Ferrell had no pulse. He says Kerrick's injuries included a red mark on his cheek and a cut in his mouth.
Stress, shock, real pale, clammy.
Ferrell's fiancée cried, remembering an argument the two had earlier that day.
I didn't say I love you or didn't say bye. He texted me and told me have a good day.
The police chief, Rodney Monroe, said that Jonathan Ferrell was banging on the door viciously, but Sarah McCarthey said she thought it was her husband. And when she saw it wasn't him, she slammed the door and ran to call 911 to tell him she thinks a black man is breaking into her house. And the 911 operator, like you said, is a black man? We'll make sure police get there as fast as they can. And when police show up, 2 of which happen to be black cops, along with Officer Randall Kerrick. Now we see that this brother, who was unarmed, take off towards the police. But the family says he was just in an accident that he had to crawl out the rear windshield just to get out of. There is a good chance he was probably just disoriented and suffering from a concussion. Officer Randall Kerrick decides to shoot his gun 12 times, hitting him at least 10 times in the chest. And even after he shot him 10 times, he then had him handcuffed face down on the ground. And of course, Officer Randall Kerrick said he feared for his life and thought he was going for his gun, so he was left with no other choice but to shoot and kill him. Now, at first, the police department said his actions were appropriate and lawful, and a grand jury decided not to press charges. But then, after a second grand jury, they decided to charge him with manslaughter and excessive force.
Charlotte police officer Randall Kerrick indicted Monday by a second grand jury, charged with voluntary manslaughter in the shooting death of former Florida A&M football player Jonathan Ferrell.
I need help.
Where are you at?
There's a guy breaking in my front door.
There's a guy breaking in your front door?
Yeah, he's trying to kick it down.
It was September 14th. Ferrell came to this house after his car ran off the road into these woods. After climbing out of the wrecked car, investigators believe he banged on the door in an apparent plea for help. The woman inside, home alone with her infant child, called police, fearing for her safety.
He's in the front yard yelling. Oh my God, please.
3 officers responded. When Ferrell approached them unarmed, one of the officers tried to subdue him with a taser, without success. Officer Kerrick then fired 12 shots, hitting Ferrell 10 times, killing him instantly. Officer Kerrick told investigators that the suspect assaulted him by unknown means, and he had apparent minor injuries, but refused treatment. Charlotte police called the shooting excessive. Less than 20 hours later, he was charged with felony voluntary manslaughter. The first grand jury declined to indict Kerrick on those charges last week, but the number of jurors present was in question.
What we don't know is how many precisely of the 18 showed up to actually hear the case. The prosecutor says there weren't enough. The defense says that's ridiculous.
On Monday, a judge ruled that the state attorney general could refile the case. Prosecutors presented the same charge to a different grand jury that returned an indictment. The defense vehemently disagrees, saying, quote, "The true outrage of this community should be at the Attorney General's complete disregard of the original findings of our first grand jury."
The defense in this case is saying these citizens did exactly what they were supposed to do by rejecting the prosecutor's case. That argument will certainly be heard throughout this case.
Now, this brother Jonathan Ferrell, who only wrecked his car, was unarmed, had no criminal record. He worked 2 jobs. He was about to get married. He played college football, so he obviously went to college. They tried to throw something about weed in there, but his toxicology report came back clean. In fact, he was the designated driver for the night. There's video evidence that goes against the cop's story, but the jury was still unable to reach a verdict. The trial ended in a hung jury, and they decided not to retry the case.
Officer Kerrick shot Ferrell 10 times during their struggle. Ferrell was unarmed and had no criminal record. I spoke to criminal defense attorney Randy Zellin about today's mistrial.
That video in and of itself was reasonable doubt. Those jurors looking at that video had to be saying to themselves, I need more information. And that is the definition of reasonable doubt. Anytime you have to make a very important decision, if you need more information, you have a reasonable doubt. And since more of what you wanted to see, you couldn't see on that video in terms of exactly what happened when those shots were fired, in the millisecond before the shots were fired, those jurors had to have a reasonable doubt.
Randy, the prosecution, you don't see exactly what happens in the video, but the prosecution tried to say that Officer Kerrick didn't even follow standard police procedure. This is an officer who had been already charged with using excessive force. He didn't follow police procedure. The other officers who were on the scene didn't even unholster their weapons.
Well, it's easy for all of us to talk about that in the coolness and the calmness and the solitude of a courtroom. But when you are on the scene, remember something. From the vantage point of the police officer, and I'm not necessarily saying that he's innocent. What I'm saying is what the jury said, which is not all of us can agree unanimously one way or the other. And remember something, that officer, all he knows is that someone fired a taser at this guy, and the guy was fine. All he knows is that he may have a suspect involved in a burglary or in some other kind of criminal activity, and all of a sudden this guy's rushing at him. That's the stuff that you don't see on the video.
So, Randy, now that this mistrial has been declared, what happens now? I mean, I guess prosecutors generally don't retry cases, do they?
Well, they do, and certainly if they feel the pressure to do so, political, or because, again, this case does have a racial component to it, it may very well be that for political reasons the case gets retried. Is that the smart thing to do? Probably not. I think both sides need to look at the case and say, wow, you know what? I could have lost this thing. And don't be surprised that as a result of that, you don't see some kind of a disposition, because a retrial is problematic for both sides. Remember, the whole defense has now been given away. The whole prosecution's been given away. Prior inconsistent statements may now be generated. You may have more impeachment material. So you may have the stage set for some kind of a resolution to this case.
Right, and Randy, to that point, I mean, this incident happened back in September of 2013, long before Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, which seemed to be the catalyst for what many are calling the Black Lives Matter movement that has happened since then. But certainly, as you point out, there might be some political considerations that the district attorney takes into account as he decides whether or not to move forward with another trial.
Though I must say, to the district attorney's credit, the one thing that this district attorney did do that most don't, he did not overcharge this case. We see time and time again where prosecutors go for the brass ring. They charge murder 1. They charge murder 2, where the case really is much more a manslaughter case, just like this one was charged. So that may be a window into this prosecutor's office where they may behave more reasonably and less apt to give in to the pressure for political reasons. But remember, again, the defense has to be concerned that we now live in a different world post-Michael Brown.
Now, even though Officer Randall Kerrick went against procedure, which caused the death of Jonathan Ferrell, and the police have no problem admitting they didn't follow procedure, they might not get punished for it, but they will admit they didn't follow procedure. But they will never admit to murder. No matter what the cops may have done wrong, the part when they murder somebody is always justified.
I thought I was going to die.
Officer Wes Kerrick's attorney asked him to show jurors how he warned Jonathan Ferrell before shooting the unarmed man 10 times.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
He said he backpedaled, but Ferrell kept running toward him.
He was going to attack me.
And by attacking you, what do you mean?
That he was going to assault me. He was going to take my gun from me.
He told jurors he would do it again under the same circumstances.
And here I was. Suspect matched the description of a B&E suspect late at night, early morning hours, and he just ran through a taser, which at the time I thought had worked. I thought the taser had struck and made contact, and I had absolutely no idea if he had a weapon on him or not.
Here's Kerrick on dashcam video before the shooting at the house where the woman thought Ferrell was trying to break inside. Prosecutors argue Ferrell just wrecked and needed help.
Did he ever say the word help?
No, sir.
Kerrick pointed out mud on his uniform where he says Ferrell was on top of him and he was scooting away.
No matter what I did, he wouldn't stop. I wasn't sure how many rounds I had fired. None of them affected him in any way. I didn't think my gun was working. And then finally, with the last round, I was able to get out from under him and get up to my knees. And he was still trying to advance towards me. I kept my gun drawn on him and ordered him not to move.
For nearly 2 years, critics have questioned why Kerrick turned off his dash camera when he arrived to the 911 caller's house.
If I had to do a B&E report, a break and entering report call, and then possibly process the scene as well as a crime scene officer, then it would have just a lot of stuff recorded that's nothing.
Why did he turn off his sirens a quarter of a mile from the home?
I did not want to alert the suspect that I was close to the scene.
And the question that keeps coming up in trial, why did he pull his gun instead of a taser like a fellow officer on the scene?
I withdrew my firearm as a backup to back Officer Little in case the taser was unsuccessful.
Is that how you were trained?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, after Randall Kerrick walked away with murder, he finally got his financial settlement with the city of Charlottesville. They gave him $113,000 in back pay, $16,000 for Social Security and retirement, and another $50,000 for lawyer fees. But in exchange, he can't sue the city or disclose any non-public information about the city. Basically, he got to keep his mouth shut about what goes on in the police departments and in the city. Now notice, every time it's one of our people that's shot down in the street and we ask for justice, then it's political. If we say stop killing us, that's political. If we talk about being underrepresented as jurors, it's political. If we're upset that one of our children are harmed or an elder is harmed, they try to call that political. They try to turn that into a Republican-Democrat problem. But Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, they all tend to agree when it's our blood being shed. They all tend to agree that our blood being shed is somehow justified. But when it comes to what happened to that nurse in Utah, or that white woman Justine Damon, who was shot and killed by Officer Muhammad Noor, then those same conservatives, Republicans, liberals, Democrats, whatever label they want to go by, then they all can agree that this kind of stuff is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. These cops should be brought up on charges. Someone should be held accountable. But they have always seen our lives as nothing more as politics. From their compromise of us supposedly being 3/5 human, to Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, to the white woman's right to vote in the 1920s, to the civil rights movements, which eventually turned into the feminist rights movement, until right now we're saying don't kill us is a political statement. We have to start being in charge of our own politics. We have to start being in charge of our own narrative. We have to put aside our tribalism and respond with greater urgency than they respond with.
It's just released interrogation video of a cop reenacting the shooting of an unarmed football star that has shocked the nation.
As he approaches me, I'm back 7. Okay. And I'm yelling, stop, stop, stop.
Officer Randall Kerrick is now on trial in Charlotte, North Carolina for voluntary manslaughter in the death of 24-year-old Jonathan Ferrell, who played for Florida A&M.
I'm backing up, and he just comes down even faster.
This police dashcam video shows Ferrell walking toward cops responding to a 911 call in 2013. Suddenly, he starts to run. Then, off camera, you hear a dozen shots. Prosecutors say he was shot 10 times by Kerrick, and they say the cop used excessive force. But the cop told detectives a different story and demonstrated how he says he fell to the ground. He says he was afraid the football star was going to take his gun.
I felt him hit my gun and grab my gun.
The tragedy happened after Jonathan Ferrell crashed his car around 2:30 a.m. He climbed out the shattered rear window of the wreck, then walked half a mile and reportedly pounded on the door of this home. The homeowner testified she was alone with her baby and made this terrified call to 911.
Is the guy breaking in your front door?
Yeah, he's trying to get down. not in the house. He's in the front yard yelling. Oh my God, please.
When cops arrived, they say they tried to taser Ferrell, but it had no effect.
Panthers fans greeted by protesters as they made their way to tonight's game at Bank of America Stadium.
Even though it's civil disobedience, they're abiding by the law. So we expect those to continue.
CMPD Chief Kerr Putney says officers are keeping a close eye around the continuing demonstrations.
On foot, on bicycles, motorcycles, and cars.
We saw lots of extra security around tonight's game. It's the second day of uptown marches after Friday's mistrial in the voluntary manslaughter case of CMPD officer Wes Kerrick. And tonight we're hearing strong opinions from one of the 12 jurors who heard the case.
There's a reason to be shot 10 times, even if I was walking towards you or running.
Moses Wilson is one of 4 jurors who wanted to find Kerrick guilty. The other 8 stuck with their belief that he was innocent. Wilson says deliberations were heated and contentious at times and believes many of the arguments about Ferrell's size and behavior were biased.
I thought all those aspects were racist, and that Jonathan Ferrell was on trial by the defense.
Wilson says 5 weeks on the jury took an emotional toll on him and others. In the end, he says there was no way opinions were going to change.
You do your duty up until the last second, until it becomes apparent that no matter what you do, those that believe certain things will believe it, and those that believe other things will believe it, and now you're locked.
And again, that march through Uptown just wrapped up in the past few minutes here in Marshall Park. Another rally is set for tomorrow afternoon at Redemption Christian Ministries in North Charlotte.
Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. He has no weapon. He has no weapon. Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. He didn't do anything. He doesn't have a gun. He has a TBI. He's not going to do anything to you guys. He just took his medicine.
Drop the gun! Let me get a fucking baton over here.
Keith, don't let them break the windows. Come on out the car.
Drop the gun!
Keith, don't do it.
Drop the gun!
Keith, get out the car. Keith, don't you do it. Don't you do it. Keith, don't you do it. Did you shoot him? Did you shoot him? Did you shoot him? He better not be fucking dead. He better not be fucking dead. I know that fucking much. I know that much. He better not be dead. I'm not gonna come near you. I'm gonna record though. I'm not coming near you. I'm gonna record though. He better be alive because I'm coming. You better be alive. How about that? Yes, we're over here at 9453 Lexington Court. These are the police officers that shot my husband, and he better live. He better live, because he didn't do nothing to them. He good. Ain't nobody touch nobody, so they all good. I know he better live. I know he better live. How about that? I'm not coming to you guys, but he better live. He better live. Y'all hear this and you see this, right? He better live. He better live. I swear he better live. Yep. He better live. He better fucking live. He better live. Where is... He better fucking live, and I can't even leave the damn... I ain't going nowhere. I'm in the same damn spot. What the fuck? That's okay. Did y'all call the police? Did y'all call an ambulance?
For years, many organizations in Wilmington have tried to make the 1898 coup, a massacre in America's history, a known historical moment. WWY's Basil John was out there talking to people in the community. He has local reaction as the state is finally recognizing that the coup did happen. It's a big story at 6.
The state's historical marker program approved a sign officially recognizing that the 1898 coup in Wilmington did happen. That's when white supremacists overthrew the African American government and drove out many from the city. Many people in Wilmington are happy the state is taking this step.
It's really great that we're finally recognizing this horrible thing that happened in our city's history, so maybe we can actually start moving forward from it.
Just admitting that something very ugly happened and that, to heal it we need to be aware of it and try to move forward.
The plaque will be placed on Market Street between 4th and 5th Streets. However, Deborah Dix Maxwell and Kojo Nantambu with the New Hanover County NAACP are upset because the plaque will say only 60 blacks died during the coup.
It's underplayed. An undetermined amount of people died in 1898. My church, which was built prior to 1898, can hold almost 1,000 people.
You go from 12,000 African Americans to 2,000. What happened to 10,000 people in that short period of time? Everybody didn't run. A lot of people got killed.
They still believe this is a step in the right direction.
It's very important that our youth understand exactly what occurred in this city, what occurred across this country because of what happened in Wilmington in 1898.
In Wilmington, Basil John, WWAY News.
Now, Maxwell says the NAACP is working to make sure that the number is corrected before the plaque is put up in March.
Blacks meant to win by legal means, whites by any means.
We shall win tomorrow if we have to do it with guns. If we have not the votes to carry the election, we must carry it by force. If you find a Negro voting, tell him to leave the poll. If he refuses, kill him. Alfred Waddell.
White supremacy reigned, and speaking out against it could have deadly consequences. This was at a time when segregation was the cultural norm, and great efforts were made by those opposed to black equality to keep black people not only separate, but unheard and powerless. Hearing this, you may think Wilmington must have been primarily white, while in fact it was quite the opposite. Wilmington had a black majority, with 20 of its 22 barbershops being black-owned. Regardless, racism still ran rampant, and racial tensions began to bubble over at the start of the 1898 political season. Violence was a part of the Democratic Party's plan to prevent black people from voting, and the party founded its political campaign on propaganda. The News and Observer, a white newspaper, ran political cartoons and articles instilling fear in the white public that African Americans were going to dominate North Carolina politics, despite making up only 33% of North Carolina's overall population. The political propaganda cartoons depicted black people as social pariahs, preying on the system, and also as winged serpents and devils preying on white women. The News and Observer ran a year-old speech by a Georgia woman by the name of Rebecca Felton, which urged Southern men to, quote, lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary, end quote, in order to protect against black rapists. Alexander Manley was the editor of the Daily Record, Wilmington's only black newspaper. Manley called out these slanderous accusations with an editorial. In it, he explained that many white women willingly sleep with black men.
Despite all the intimidation, many black voters were turning out and were voting. So the word goes out from Democratic headquarters that if we can intimidate the black votes and get a majority that way, we will simply stuff the ballot boxes. And that's exactly what they do.
Every black candidate in North Carolina was defeated. But in Wilmington, the political victory did not satisfy white anger. A mob set Manley's newspaper on fire, and every black official was driven out of office.
They could not wait until it was time for the change of office to take place.
They decided to take control of everything.
It was basically a coup. They just took the offices away from the duly elected office holders.
So there are no longer any black officials in Wilmington city government.
The coup was followed by a massacre.
Firing began, and it seemed like a mighty battle in wartime. They went on firing, it seemed, at every living Negro, poured volleys into fleeing men like sportsmen firing at rabbits in an open field. The shrieks and screams of children, of mothers and wives, caused the blood of the most inhuman person to creep. Men lay on the street dead and dying, while members of their race walked by, unable to do them any good. Reverend Allen Kirk.
They went after business owners. They went after voters. They went after doctors and black lawyers. Those are the people they ran out of town because those are the people they saw as getting out of their place and therefore encouraging other black people to get out of their places.
Despite the odds against them, some blacks fought back. Others protested to the federal government.
Blacks from all over the United States wrote letters to the President of the United States begging him to intervene and to stop the violence and the killing in Wilmington.
President William McKinley remained silent.
I think it showed that the national government had lost its commitment to protecting the civil and political rights of blacks, especially in the South.
Charles Francis Bourke, a northern reporter, witnessed blacks fleeing from the city.
In the woods and swamps, hundreds of innocent, terrified men and women wander about, fearful of the vengeance of whites, fearful of death. Without money or food, insufficiently clothed, they fled from civilization and sought refuge in the wilderness. In the night, I hear children crying, and a voice crooning a mournful song.
And those of us who were left found our places and stayed there.
The destruction of black political power in North Carolina unleashed a wave of racial discrimination triumphantly announced in newspapers and printed on postcards. Facilities that were once integrated were now legally segregated. Public transportation and parks, restaurants and theaters, jobs and juries. The relative oasis that North Carolina had been for blacks was now a desert of white supremacy.
All right, and we back on the forecast. So in the Bronx, New York, an 18-year-old brother named Ramarley Graham was shot in his own home in the bathroom by the police. Now let's see how this brother could get murdered by police in his own bathroom in front of his grandma and his 6-year-old little brother.
The surveillance video is dramatic and telling. At 3 p.m. Thursday, 18-year-old Ramarley Graham can be seen walking into his home on East 229th in the Bronx. The NYPD rushes in seconds later without a search warrant and try to gain entry.
And he's kicking the door because the door is locked. They came in with their gun drawn.
According to a resident who was inside during the forced entry,
they did not screen police.
And there is no sign of a search warrant. The surveillance video is high grade. Its clarity, that of a professional. Clearly the officers are seen desperately trying to break into the house through the front door. The damage evident once we got our cameras inside. The video also shows the NYPD entering through the back and then unlocking the front door. Once in, the race upstairs to Graham is on. And moments later, boom, boom, is all Paulette Minzy heard. In her bathroom and barely dressed, she suddenly had a gun in her face. Minzy then put her hands up and screams,
"I'm the landlord, I'm the landlord."
Minzy said the NYPD then searched her home. They found no gun. On the second floor, an unarmed Ramarley Graham was dead. After everything that's happened and the death of the young boy, how do you trust police?
I can't trust them. I'm scared of them. Right now I'm scared of my life because I don't know what they will do. Because, you know, I don't know what they do, and if they saw me, I'm so scared.
Do you think they're doing their job?
No, they're not. They're not doing their job. They're not doing their job. They're cruel. They're very cruel, and I'm scared of my life because the cops come and put the gun in my face. I'm so scared.
So the Street Narcotic Enforcement Unit saw Ramarley Graham coming out of a bodega, adjusting and tugging at a gun on his waistband as he was coming out of the store. So Sergeant Scott Morris, Officer John Mcloughin, and Officer Richard Haste decided to follow this young brother from the store to his apartment. Now, when the cops couldn't get in, There's surveillance video of them banging on the door, kicking on the door, doing everything they can to get in. And eventually one of the cops gets in through the back door and lets the rest of them in. Now, Ramarley Graham's grandmother says she never heard the police identify themselves when they came in. Now, mind you, the police aren't supposed to enter any home unless they have a warrant or it's a medical emergency. And there was no medical emergency, and these cops didn't have a warrant. But after Officer John Mcloughin kicked the door in, Officer Richard Haste ran in and shot Ramarley Graham in the chest. Now, of course, Officer Richard Haste blamed everything on Ramarley Graham, claiming that he rushed him and then ducked into the bathroom. Initially, police said there was a struggle and that Ramarley may have been trying to grab for his waistband. Officer Richard Haste claimed he said, "Show me your hands," and then screamed, "Gun, gun," before shooting him one time in the chest, claiming that he thought he saw a gun. The problem is, this young brother was unarmed and there wasn't a gun anywhere in the house. They also said he was trying to dump a bag of weed in the toilet. Now, first of all, in New York, depending on how much you have, weed is nothing but a ticket. And second, if he was trying to dump weed down the toilet, how was he struggling with the police and reaching for his waistband at the same time? Jonathan Haste said, "I know what I did was justified. I protected myself and my team based off what we knew at the time." So originally, Officer Richard Haste was placed on modified duty. And eventually, 4 months later, he was brought up on manslaughter charges.
It is our intention to push on with this case, to make sure that the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney move forward with charges of civil rights violations because justice was not served in Bronx County today.
I just want to say, February 2nd happened yesterday all over again. It seems like it's a never-ending situation when it comes to our kids. We have to stand here and fight and to prove they're innocent while cops around the city running around, walking around free after they murdered somebody's kids. Ramarley had a mother. Ramarley had a father. The modern-day lynching has to stop. It's only a different way of them doing it, gunning down our kids. We know what happened. We know Scott Morris and Richard Haste went in my house and murdered my child.
I stand before you here today, but even though you're standing in front of me, it's like I'm in a dark place, because everything just seems dark to me. My son is gone. My son is gone. And Richard Haste is able to go back and do his job and maybe kill again. And we have to ask ourselves this question. Had Ramarley been white, would this have happened? Would they have run in a white person's home? Ramarley is dead on no cause of his own. He was in his house where you're supposed to be free and safe, and he's dead.
But a Bronx Supreme Court Justice, Steven Barrett, dismissed the indictment because he claims the prosecution gave the grand jury flawed instruction. Then after Judge Steven Barrett dismissed the original indictment, the grand jury declined to re-indict Richard Haste.
A judge throws out the indictment against police officer Richard Haste. He's the man who killed unarmed Bronx teen Ramarley Graham in his home last year. The decision infuriated Graham's parents. They spoke to our Brittany Miller just hours after the announcement. She has this interview that you'll only see on 12.
Justice and peace, two things the family of Ramarley Graham say were absent from the courtroom Wednesday morning when the indictment against Officer Richard Haste was tossed out and the charges dropped. A Bronx judge called instructions to the grand jury misleading, saying the Bronx DA's office was incorrect in telling the grand jury to disregard communication to Richard Haste that Ramarley may be armed.
The judge made a difficult but correct decision here. There's no winners or losers in this case.
I don't care what the PBA might say, there's no winners here. I would love to have my son
So we are definitely the losers.
In an exclusive sit-down with Ramarley's parents, Frank Graham and Constance Mcloughin, the pair dished the details of what was running through their minds when they heard the judge's decision, especially Mcloughin.
And I felt that I had to make him see my pain, show him what he did to my family and what he did to me.
I don't care. What more can you do to me? What more can you do to me?
What more can you do to me? You already took my child. Lock me up ain't gonna do anything for me. So you do what you want to do, because I'm a mom and I'm going to continue to fight, because the fight that's over here, it don't stop here, it's going to continue.
Meanwhile, the Bronx DA's office was told it could represent the case to a grand jury, a move Graham doesn't want the DA to make.
I don't know if anyone in that office will try this case properly, because the DA worked closely with the NYPD, and it's like they're buddies. So how can I trust them to send their buddies to prison?
Both Frank and Constance say they understand the dismissal of the charges doesn't mean the case is completely over. In fact, they say this is just the beginning.
We are going to get justice. We are going to shut this city down.
And the Graham family says they will continue to fight. They plan on holding a rally right here in front of their house on East 229th Street at 1 p.m. on Saturday.
Even though an internal review found he used poor tactical judgment and they recommend his dismissal. But he ended up resigning before they could fire him. So before they actually fired Richard Haste and took his gun and badge away from him, he resigned, and now it won't show up on his record that he got fired. So if he applies at the next police department, he won't have to explain why he got fired. And since this murder was justified, he doesn't have to mention it at all.
It has been 5 years since that controversial shooting. Today, new outrage from the victim's family and new insight into this ex-officer. CBS 2's Jessica Layton spoke with him, and she joins us live in the Throdsnick section of the Bronx. Jessica.
And Christine, this is really the first time we have ever heard from now ex-NYPD officer Richard Haste. Tonight he told me he was only doing what his training told him to do, but he has thought about that day every day for the past 5 years.
5 years later, again, I'm standing here with a slap in the face. Richard Haste was allowed to resign.
A deep scarring wound has opened back up for the mother of Ramarley Graham after learning the NYPD officer who shot and killed her teenage son in 2012 was allowed to resign before the likely fate of being fired.
And as I stand here, I have no answer as a mother. How can I move forward and heal?
Surrounded by supporters, Constance Mcloughin was emotional talking about the loss, with anger directed at City Hall for allowing Richard Haste to walk away from the job before the police commissioner could officially pull his badge. The mayor refusing to answer questions about the case from CBS 2 political reporter Marsha Kramer Monday.
Mr. Mayor, Ramarley Graham's family is angry. Will you meet with him? Will you meet with Ramarley Graham's family?
We spoke with the now ex-NYPD cop outside his home in the Bronx Monday night.
The outcome, it was a tragedy. Nobody wanted to be there. Nobody wanted that to happen. Monday morning quarterbacking, no one did that more than myself. Did we do it right? Did we get in there, do the right thing?
Haste has been on modified duty since the fatal shooting of the unarmed Bronx teen, fighting for his job along the way until now. After a judge ruled he used poor tactical judgment and he should be fired, he filed paperwork for his own resignation. Would you do it the same?
I can't, with the information that I had, I don't think I could do it differently. None of that day happened with any hate, malice, or intent. It was just, cops going after a guy with a gun.
To point out once again, it was discovered that Graham was unarmed that day. He had no gun when he was shot and killed that day in the Bronx. Today, his mother called Richard Haste reckless, and I asked Haste tonight what he thought about being called reckless. He paused for a long time, and he carefully chose his words, saying he cannot begin to imagine the pain that their family has gone through. He essentially lost his job in all this, but they lost a brother and a son.
Not that it matters, it's not like that affects these police department decisions, but it's still not on his record at all. Now, apparently, according to the paperwork, Richard Haste hadn't been trained in street-level narcotic or plainclothes work. Even though Ramarley Graham's family demanded this police officer's history be made public, they did everything they could to protect this officer. Richard Haste left the department before his full disciplinary history was released to the public. The only problem was an anonymous former employee for the Civilian Complaint Review Board leaked a copy of his disciplinary record. And it turns out Richard Haste had 6 complaints logged against him, all in the span of 13 months before he shot this young brother. In all, he had 10 allegations against him, including using physical force, using pepper spray, offensive language, and making an abusive frisk. 4 of the allegations were removed completely from the document. And then you have Mayor Bill De Blasio with his black wife co-signing all of this stuff. Now, I understand people want to date and marry whoever they want to marry, and it's none of my business. But the problem is, how can you take a stand against black children or black people in general being murdered and gunned down by the police and still stand beside somebody like Bill De Blasio, who co-signed and justified all of it, who is co-signing and justifying the murder of young black people, of young black brothers? No matter how much you think they love you, they're not going to fight to get rid of their privilege for you. White men and women who have biracial children don't seem to want to do it for their own kids. So why would they do it for you? They know how to compartmentalize sex and power. They don't have a problem having sex with you. They have a problem when you talk about replacing this system. They have a problem when you talk about justice. They have a problem when you talk about no longer being subject to their laws and to their punishments. Then they have a problem. No matter how much sex they have or how many children they bear. At the end of the day, their position in society means more to them than any of that. And until we can get that urgency that they have to maintain their position, when the blood of our children or our elderly or any of us is spilled, then we'll continue to have the same arguments, the same problems, the same discussions another 100 years from now.
Retired from NYPD 11 years ago. I joined the force in '84. And I'm here to tell you all, that in every single one of these cases, with the Chantel Davis, and I had the misfortune of mentioning that the police were going to start killing our women, and 2 weeks later, Chantel was the first one that was gunned down. And I feel bad for foretelling that, but when you have police out here running ragged, sooner or later you knew that was going to happen. And I'm here to tell you again that in all of these cases, NYPD violated all of the rules and regulations in that point. In Chantel Davis' case, a police officer is never, ever, ever to shoot at a car, a moving car, not unless the person in the car, someone in the car, is shooting at the police. And in that case with Chantel Davis, that officer was not supposed to fire. That officer shouldn't even been on the street. Because like what was said, there were 6 other lawsuits pending against that officer. And you can't tell me that he couldn't have been on desk duty, until they were settled. And the Kenneth Chamberlain case, which is a mirror of Eleanor Bumpur's case, the White Plains Police took their training from NYPD. So if they took their training from NYPD, when you have a barricaded person, you take all the time necessary because the only person they can hurt is themselves. And most people have said, I would rather the person hurt themselves than the police to come out and kill them. Because Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. knew what he was doing. He wasn't a person who was losing his mind. He made a mistake and he tripped off his medic alert. He got on the phone and he told the people that it was a mistake and that it was no need for the police to come. So for the police to come and kick his door down when he had a relative who came to the floor and said, listen, that's my relative, I have keys, let me go in there and calm my relative down, they refused to let that woman go in there and calm her relative down, but then they used racial epithets as what was said to lure him out as a tactic. Well, let me tell you something. With my 20 years on the force, and I had to sometimes arrest Caucasian people, if I would have called them a racial epithet, I think I would have lost my job once I'd have told my boss, oh, I just used it as a tactic, you know, to calm the person down. You know, in Ramarley Graham case here, we have it on video. We have it on video where the officer, like Constance said, police are never supposed to enter a residence, not unless they have a search warrant or in an emergency situation. There was no emergency situation here. They started kicking the door down from the minute they came on the property. And they were able to gain entry through the back, forcing someone to open up their door and run them through their house under duress with a gun in their face. And then they commenced to going upstairs, kicking Ramarley's door in and firing in front of his grandmother and his 6-year-old brother. That was wrong. In the Sean Bell incident, it was wrong. Listen, I can go on and on and on. But what hurts me and really displeases me is that although I'm retired, there's a lot of other black and Hispanic officers that's out here retired too. You know? And they need to be out here when these injustices are going on. And it teased me off that they don't. But yet and still, when one of ours was forcibly arrested by NYPD a year ago, they called me, and it was over 250 of us that was going to go down to One Police Plaza, and then the district attorney, Cy Vance, blinked and said, y'all don't have to come down, we're going to cut them loose. And that was only 250 officers. So imagine if those same 250 officers was to come out here in our neighborhoods when the police have violated our people. Imagine how much power we can have, because I told them all, when it comes time to lock up anybody, we, the 250 ex-police officers, are the first ones to get our heads busted and the first ones to go in the jail cell, because we know that cops won't dare want to bust our heads in front of everybody else, because they know that we will damn sure fight them back, and they know. So I'm going to continue to support this family and every other family. And I'm going to continue to speak out against the mistreatment, abuse, and murder that not just NYPD, but any police or any police department, because they're really not a department, what they are is an organization. That's what all of these law enforcement agencies that have perpetuated violence and killed our people, they're not police law enforcement agencies, they're organizations, because a law enforcement agency follows their own rules and regulations, and they will chastise their officers. So along with NYPD, I will call NYPD an organization, not a department, until they stand for what a department does.
First tonight, the future for an NYPD officer who fired the fatal shot is being debated at an NYPD trial. Officer Richard Haste was originally charged with manslaughter in the death of Ramarley Graham in 2012, but Haste was never prosecuted. Graham's family says the officer should lose his job. CBS 2's Andrea Grimes with the new information tonight in Lower Manhattan.
My purpose is to make sure Richard Haste is fired.
A mother's fight for her son and an NYPD officer's fight to keep his job.
Officer Haste, although he knows he committed no misconduct, is remorseful for the loss of a life.
The NYPD disciplinary trial began today for Officer Richard Haste, who shot and killed Ramarley Graham inside his Bronx home back in February of 2012. Haste was part of a narcotics unit on patrol, and one of his fellow cops radioed that Graham had a gun. Haste followed Graham inside, not knowing it was his apartment, his attorney says, and shot him in a bathroom when he thought Graham was reaching for a weapon. No gun was found. Haste's attorney says Graham never showed his hands, as he was instructed to do before the shooting. In the proceedings today, Haste's attorney pointed out the NYPD Firearm Discharge Review Board ruled the shooting itself justified, but that he did not use proper tactics.
If the shooting is justified, the tactics should be justified. and in this case, they're looking for a scapegoat because of the unfortunate outcome of the shooting.
The NYPD attorney said in opening statements that police never should have broken down Graham's door, saying, quote, Officer Haste exercised poor tactical judgment, which led to the discharge of his firearm, causing Graham's death. This departmental trial is expected to last through the end of this week. The NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Trials will then make a recommendation to the police commissioner, who has the final say on whether or not Haste is fired. His attorney expects a decision within the next 60 to 90 days.
I was telling during this, I told him twice to stop, stop, stop.
Why did you tell him stop, stop?
I wanted him to stop the car. And I could feel his car turning left into me. So I'm falling backwards and I'm falling lower and lower. I'm falling lower and lower against his driver's door. I remember thinking, oh my God, that he's going to run me over and he's going to kill me. That he's actively dragging me with his car right now, and my arm is stuck in there, and I cannot get it out. And he's turning left into me with his car. He's got his foot mashed in the accelerator, and his back tire is going to run me over.
You intentionally shot him in the head, correct?
Sir, I fired at him because I thought he was going to kill me.
You testified that the only thing you'd see was his head, and you fired your weapon. You aimed your weapon and fired it at his head, correct?
Yes, because my body was falling backwards, and I was falling low against his driver's door, and I was looking up, and that's the only part of his body I could see.
The undershirt that was taken from you on July 19th at University Hospital had writing on it that said Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee, I believe, correct?
Yes, sir.
And centered in the middle of that was a Confederate flag, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and does a Confederate flag mean anything to you?
It has no meaning to me, no.
What was the purpose of did you have any purpose in putting that particular shirt on that day?
I had a certain number of black shirts in my rotation to wear for my summer uniform for UC, and you kind of want to wear older t-shirts because when it's hot out in your vest, you start sweating a lot and your t-shirt gets soaked with sweat. The t-shirt was bought 4 or 5 years ago. I believe a relative who visited Gatlinburg, they'd bought that shirt for me and brought it back.
Outrage from some people in Westchester County tonight after they say Nazi propaganda was sold at a gun show this weekend. CBS 2's Jessica Borg with the story, new at 6 tonight.
It's actually sickening.
New Rochelle resident and mom of 2, Stephanie Frankel, says she's furious over these pictures. Books apparently being sold at the gun show this past weekend at the Westchester County Center.
You have Mein Kampf, you have Hitler's letters and notes. I was Hitler's chauffeur.
The Westchester Democratic Legislature says a member of its staff took these pictures showing Nazi literature and items with the Confederate flags being sold by vendors.
Symbols of hate have no place in our county.
The gun show itself is controversial in Westchester County. There hasn't been one in 4 years since the Sandy Hook school shootings. 2 weeks ago, the County Board of Legislators voted 9-8 to ban the gun show from coming here to the county center. Last Thursday, the county executive vetoed that ban. Phil Oliva is the senior advisor to County Executive Rob Astorino. He says the gun show had a record turnout, 8,000 people over 2 days, bringing between $40,000 to $50,000 in revenue to the county. Oliva says he was at the gun show and didn't see anything racist or anti-Semitic being sold.
I saw beef jerky, I saw belts, firearms, hats. I did not see the books that they had.
He says the close-ups of the books that have been circulating could have been taken anywhere.
Could have been from a local public library, because you can go to any Westchester County library today and get those books out. So, I mean, they are historical books.
He claims it's controversy being stirred up by political opponents. Meanwhile, the legislature has until the end of this year to override the county executive's veto of the gun show. In White Plains, Westchester County, Jessica Borg, CBS 2 News.
And some residents say they will be protesting the gun show at a public hearing scheduled for tonight at the Westchester County Center.
I just have to say, thanks for the endorsement, Bill. Took you long enough.
Oh, snap!
Sorry, Hillary. I was running on CP time.
That's not, I don't like jokes like that, Bill. That's not funny.
Cautious politician time.
I do apologize. I know I was a little late tonight. I was running on CPT. Which stands for jokes that white people should not make.
All right, and we back on the forecast, and I want to say RIP to the brother Jonathan Ferrell and the brother Ramarley Graham. 2 more young brothers shot down, unarmed, not committing a crime, yet it is justified as always. And if we dare talk about justice or punishment for the cops, then we're just talking about politics and doing things for political reasons. But that's because they see our lives as nothing but politics. We fight each other to have relationships with the dominant society. But to them, it's all about politics, not love. Slave owners used to have relationships with black women. Some of them even loved them. But when they started talking about freedom for themselves or for their children or for others, all that love went right out the window. And the dominant society might come home to you every night, might lay up with you every night, but when you start talking about changing the laws and the rules and actually getting some justice, then all that love goes right out the window. And until we can learn how to put aside our tribalisms, then the same thing will continue to happen over and over and over until we can learn how to work together and unify. So, as always, man, we have got to start standing for something, or we're going to keep falling for anything.